You are listening to the I Choose My Best Life podcast with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, a show that is dedicated to helping you live fully, love boldly, and rest intentionally. For additional resources, visit ichoosemybestlife.com.
Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Saundra, and you're listening to I Choose My Best Life. Today, I have joining me Dr. Pamela Pyle, and we are going to discuss how can we enter our next phase of living with God with grace, specifically Anticipating Heaven, which is the name also of her newest book, Spiritual Comfort and Practical Wisdom for Life's Final Chapters. I want to begin by having Dr. Pyle share a little bit about her background, the type of physician that she is, and how you got interested really in this particular end-of-life work.
First, I just want to thank you, Dr. Saundra, for having me. Your work is incredible, and I am now a fan, as so many others are, I'm sure. But my background is internal medicine, and I graduated from my residency, and hard to believe it was 1992, and I went directly from residency in Texas at Baylor to an inpatient hospital position that was really one of the first hospital-based programs not involved with the university. And over the years and now decades, I have loved hospital-based medicine. There is such a privilege of entering into someone's life when they're in the midst of suffering, and their authentic emotions are so powerful. And I feel like I was equipped with the gene of empathy and just becoming a good listener. But truly, in the decades, I realized part of that becoming a good listener is that my patients were wonderful teachers. And I gained life wisdom, medical wisdom, family wisdom, and ultimately came to know Christ in my 30s as a result of medicine. And of course, his precious calling upon my life. But it was one of those patients that was in 2018 that she had been in and out of the hospital. I knew her from multiple stays, and she had a terminal lung disease, and it was nearing the end. And in this hospital stay, she wanted to speak to me, and I was sitting on the side of her bed and holding her hand, and she had some very specific questions about her condition, and she had made the decision that she only wanted to have comfort care. And those questions led to what to expect, and also what her family would see and what they should expect. And at this moment, I look up and there's a picture of her family in the room, who I had also come to know. I realized how much I was going to miss her when I looked at her family and thought this deep love this family has had and how much they would miss her. And then I just began to weep. And this beautiful lady grabs my hand with her other hand, and she says, "It's okay. It will be a good death." And the thing about that, Dr. Saundra, I knew Saundra, she was talking about her destination. And I have, in all my work as a physician, as a Christian physician, always explored that to the best of my ability. It's what are people's beliefs, and how can I pray for them? And so I knew she was talking about her destination, but God chose that statement, that moment, to really begin my own exploration of what is a good death beyond our destination, and what is my role in helping people understand that. And it began with really exploring my own perception of my own mortality. And as doctors, we so often don't think about that. But I spent a fair amount of time, in about a year, just what is a good death? What are the ingredients? And what I came to realize is that a good death is not an event, it's a lifestyle. And it's a lifestyle that we live every day because how we end, and if we want to end well, is how we live our days each and every day. And so I really, that was the beginning of what was my writing career. And I started writing for magazines and journals and ultimately anticipating heaven. But I wanted to not write a book just about dying. I wanted to enter the patient's life from the very first moment they get a serious diagnosis. Because it's then, as you well know, that they get a sense of their own mortality. And there's always chaos and fear, even in deep faith. And so I walk the patient through the practical, these are the questions to ask. This is how to be heard when you're in hospital. These are your rights, how to get multiple opinions, even how to find a good doctor to manage your care, and then all the way to their last diagnosis. And all of
Also
that is to
important.
help them cope.
Yes, also important because I don't think most of the time when someone enters a hospital setting, they already feel ill prepared for being in the place because they don't know the protocols, they don't know the system, they don't know what insurance is going to cover. There's so many aspects of it, I think, that can produce fear and uncertainty. And that fear and uncertainty gets compounded when you get a critical or a fatal type diagnosis. And so I think that the story that you shared, I think a lot of physicians and nurses and people in healthcare can probably relate to layers of that. I love that you were a hospitalist before a hospitalist was even a thing, before it was
Yes.
really even a
Yes.
term. I personally practice what most people would consider traditional internal medicine, in that I have an office and then I go into the hospital and see my patients, including seeing them in the ICU and caring for them in the ICU and the ER. So I can definitely relate to that. I oftentimes share that that's part of the reason I burned out, is because I do have a high level of empathy, and I was seeing people at church and all the places where I'm caring for them outside, and then I see them at the end of life. And so I think a lot of healthcare workers can relate to that sense of loss sometimes that you have cared for people for a long time. I want to
Mhm.
take a moment to go a little bit deeper into some of the different aspects of what you laid out there and break them down so that people can, if they're in this moment right now, that they can begin to think about it. And then hopefully by the time before we conclude our time together, have a moment to even speak to some of those who might not have a plan in place, because death
Mhm.
comes for us all. It's not something you get to choose. So to be able to be thinking ahead of time and anticipating these end of life moments in a way that is not threatening and also gives grace for the family in those moments as well. So let's begin with this. For the person who's finding out that they got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer or some variation of that, a life threatening type situation, what are ways that they can begin to navigate this healthcare aspect of the journey, the doctors, the visits, all the stuff, with some level of peace and confidence? And is it possible to navigate it with peace, considering what's coming or what could potentially come?
That's a great question. And he said it at its core ultimately comes through faith. And so wherever you are, even if you have no faith, I would say begin to explore what faith looks like to you. And God, as the Bible says, if you seek me, you will find me. But also, peace comes from having a sense of what to expect. And when you're at the very beginning of a diagnosis, and we know so many terrible statistics about pancreatic cancer, that we assume that our life will also be reflected in the stories that we've heard. And I don't want you to give up hope, even if it's a terrible diagnosis. One, and part of the things that I recommend at the very beginning is you want to make sure that you are getting the most accurate diagnosis as well as feel confident in your treatment plan. And that comes with having a great sense of trust in those that are providing care. And you may have a doctor like you, Dr. Saundra, that already has created that trust. But oftentimes patients don't necessarily have that. And so there's two ways to get trust with the clinical team. And the first is experience and time, but we don't always have that at the very beginning. The second is asking others for doctors that they trust, and that's called borrowed trust. And so one of the very practical ways is talk to maybe your dentist or your primary care doctor or the nurse that lives down the street. Who do they see and why? And I always ask patients at the end of any kind of serious discussion, ask the question, if this were your loved one, what would you do if you were me? And the thing about that question versus what would you do if this were you? When we put it in the context of someone we love, we tend to be more contemplative and probably a lot more thorough in how we would approach it. I think getting a second and sometimes a third opinion is extremely important. One, for peace of mind. Two, if you think about the things we get multiple opinions, for example, a wedding planner for our child, we would interview two or three at a minimum before we would make a decision. We need to consider if this is not a negative thing, it's a positive thing. And it may just reaffirm your initial diagnosis and your initial treatment plan. But having that awareness of trust and confidence of what to expect. And then I say knowledge is power, and that's in every aspect of the clinical spectrum. And so I spend a lot of time in anticipating heaven of equipping where to find knowledge and how to process it. Specifically, I don't recommend Dr. Google, especially at the beginning of a diagnosis. It will terrify you, it will mislead you, and you're not gaining wisdom. You're reading knowledge. Wisdom is knowledge applied to experience, and that comes with your trusted doctor. And as you go for each of your appointments, there are lists of questions that will help guide the appointment. And you will come away feeling like all your questions were answered because you had them listed out in advance. And the same with going into a hospital setting. I have specific times about when to ask the questions, how to ask them, and how to be heard. And then if you're not being heard, how to make changes. And finally, I always say that we are in such a increasingly powerful time in medicine in that there are so many new therapies for cancer specifically, that there are many that will feel it will be eradicated in our lifetime. And so don't give up hope, even if it feels hopeless at the beginning.
That's such good wisdom. And I think for a lot of patients, when they get a diagnosis that they feel is definitely a death sentence, as some of them will say. It actually pulls them into the negative and actually, I feel, keeps them from staying in a healthy mental place for healing. I think healing has to have a foundation on which to bloom. And if all hope is lost, there's a decrease in the healing ability. There's a definitely connection between the mind, the body, and the spirit. And so all have to
Absolutely.
be moving towards a belief of flourishing and growth and restoration. I want to also take a moment to think about the other side of that. So we discussed with the patient and what to do in the moment when you have the diagnosis. What are some things that we can do as family members of maybe elderly parents or other people who we are responsible for to make sure that we are prepared for end of life situations? Because even if you have an elderly parent who is perfectly healthy, if they're 95, none of us live forever. We need to be mindful of the fact that the end is eventually coming. How do we prepare for that?
So I call that living with the end in mind, because the truth is our ending could be tomorrow. And so regardless of age or health status, the better plan you have, the less fear you'll have when the crisis comes. And the crisis always comes. We just don't know when it will be. And especially with our parents, as we're navigating health with them, the most important thing is that they don't have this uneasiness of the unknown. And so, with the more we talk about the difficult topics, including our own death, and plans for those difficult days, the less fear we'll have when they occur. And we'll also be able to navigate not in the center of a crisis. We'll be able to do more self care, more loving things, more bucket list items. And it all comes by planning early. And that plan is very in depth. The first and the most simplest is an advanced care plan. That is for the end of life, or if you are unable to speak for yourself. And what I always say is, if you want to maintain your autonomy, which is fear, the number one fear of aging is loss of autonomy, to maintain it longer, having a plan and that plan be your voice will help it speak, even if you can't. And so coming together, I call it a generational generosity gathering, where all generations in a family complete their advanced care plan together. There's value in that, as I said, because we don't know what tomorrow holds. It also helps us with our older generation because they don't want to feel singled out as well. We're only doing this because of me. No, we're doing it because our teenage and college age kids believe that they're immortal. And we're also in our busyness of the workplace and life, not doing the things that we should do for our own cancer screening, as an example. So these conversations are for every generation. And when we have them, it normalizes the fearful. And
I
then
love that approach.
I have, I have a resource that's free on my website. It's called the Planning for Peace Checklist. And that checklist is very comprehensive. And it's everything that, including healthcare planning, but financial planning, what to do with your dog if you had to go to a hospital, a giving will, a living will, digital death. If we think about our online presence, is in so many places, from our banking to our social media. We have to have a plan in place for what, if we were to die, how does that be taken care of? And that plan takes a while, and we all need it now, from storing our computer passwords to the ending and what we want our legacy to be about. And when we start to plan, we can start to think about our legacy. And you don't have to have a lot of money to think legacy matters. In fact, our wealth is found in so many places other than financial sources. And our legacy is determined by how intentional we are with it. If we all leave a legacy, good or bad, but when we're intentional about it being good, it starts today.
We've been chatting with Dr. Pamela Pyle. She is the author of the book, Anticipating Heaven. And I want to make sure, Dr. Pamela, that people know how to connect with you and how to get a copy of your new release.
Yes, so I have a website. It's Dr. Pamela, drpamela.com. And on that website, you'll see many resources, including how to get the Planning for Peace checklist, as well as ordering Anticipating Heaven. And that's also in Amazon and any other bookstore.
Excellent. We'll link to your resources, including the Planning for Peace download that people can get. That sounds like an amazing resource that would help lots of families. And make sure that we also link to your book on Amazon to make it easy for everyone to get it directly from the show notes. So, Dr. Pamela, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Until next time, everyone, live fully, love boldly, and rest intentionally. We all desire to be fully seen, fully loved, and still invited to belong. That's what my newest book, Being Fully Known, is all about. Through scripture and story, I'll help you rediscover who you are, whose you are, and where you belong in God's good plan for your life. Grab your copy at ichoosemybestlife.com or your favorite bookstore.